Hey guys, and welcome to another episode of Keep Wise with Keepingly. And this is Daniel Smith, your host. And on my next side, we have
Hey guys, it's Amira. Good to hear and see you all this time around. How are you, Daniel? How's it going?
Mira. You know how our weeks go. It's been hectic as usual. Life's ups and downs, and and we're in the middle of conference season. So some unexpected. I need to go to this conference, or I need to show up here. Stuff like that. The life of founders, how we live. So it's been a bit hectic. I don't know if you noticed new glasses, but all of a sudden I can find my own ones. Life got really hectic. I just lost my car. So but it's been our usual life. How about you?
Things have been good, busy as of course, but I couldn't help but notice that you're out there meeting different people that you think might be really interesting for people that are interested in figuring out how to take care of their homes and thinking about what's important as either a potential homeowner or a current homeowner. And so I'm really, really excited to find out who we have today and to get this conversation going. So who do we have today?
So that's a good one. So today we have Joshua Wallet, and he is from Wallet Solutions, and he is an appraiser. Now, Joshua will give you, and we'll ask Joshua about his background, so we can delve into that. But one of the things why Joshua is so important in this conversation, it does follow up on the conversation that we had with Julian like 2 weeks ago. But Joshua is the president of the National Association of Appraisers, and he's been doing this for like 20 years as an appraiser. And then he served in 2021 and in 2022 as president. And so he is certified. He has a lot of instructions. And the funny thing about this is that Joshua and I met online, and he had one opinion and I had a different opinion. And, we're like, okay, well, I need to get you on the podcast because I want your opinion, because while Daniel's opinion, I'm just a homeowner. Joshua has the expertise. And, but we did agree that, especially based on what Keepingly is building, that just the documentation around homeowners or that homeowners need to have would really be a critical part of this journey. So we're happy and excited to have Joshua because I think Joshua brings a lot of that industry expertise to this conversation, just like Jillian did. Inspiring us in terms of what needs to be done and what people need to be thinking about and looking at. And so, that's, it's exciting to have Joshua. So let's bring up Joshua.
Hello. Hey,
Awesome.
thank you for having me.
Hey Joshua, how are you today?
Good. How are you guys doing?
Great, great. Well, why don't we let you introduce yourself?
Great. Yeah. So I am Josh Walitt. I am a certified residential appraiser out of Colorado. So if anyone's familiar with Colorado, I'm in the western part of the state, Grand Junction, almost into Utah, so far west. And my experience as a field appraiser, I covered small cities, small towns, as well as very many rural and remote areas of western Colorado. At the peak, I was out in the field in 4 counties. And so a lot of field experience. I've moved away from the field. Now I'm doing consulting. So we do special projects for lenders, for banks, for appraisal firms, for appraisal management companies and regulators at the state and federal level. And so we describe ourselves at Wallet Solutions as sort of a puzzle piece. We sort of fit into different clients in different ways. So that puzzle piece is always different. But what I really like is the analytics side of appraising, really, kind of crunching the data and having some very supported conclusions. So I really like that part. And I also, so we focus on the methods, the techniques. We also focus on the regulatory and compliant side of things. So appraisers, lenders, AMCs, they all need to follow quite a few regulations. They're highly, highly regulated. So we help help fill in any gaps they may have in doing that. So thank you for having me. And Daniel, I'll just jump off with how you were saying how we met. I think it was a perfect example of online where, you know, different people make different comments, and it's really actually hard to communicate. You know, we think, oh, look, we're communicating, but we're not communicating. And so I really appreciated the opportunity to talk with you. And I've had some people say, oh, well, you know, we can't just be talking about this and talking about, but that's where everything starts. You have to talk to people so people understand. You know, I think I didn't understand what your perspective was. You didn't understand what my perspective was. And then we actually saw, oh, we're not too different in what we would like to see happen. So I appreciate that anecdote.
Okay, you guys can't tell us that and not tell us what happened. What was the topic? What's going on here?
It was, what was it? It was, I think it was on, it was an article on bias, and people were I don't want to say misconstruing, but people were assuming this whole big thing from a few words. And I said, hey, there's more to it. This is not all I said. Let's talk about everything else. And Daniel actually came in as sort of this wise voice of moderation. And it was really good. You know, I've actually connected with other people who, as a result of those types of interactions. So it's good.
Yeah.
I don't know if it was, oh, go ahead.
I was going to say that Joshua was actually quoted. And so I kind of, you know, Joshua was quoted in an article, you know, talking about bias. And I was just like, yeah, this is interesting. But, you know, have you considered it this way? Or have you considered it that way? And, you know, I tried to add, you know, especially, you know, Amir, you know, one of the things that we look at, you know, especially as minorities, you know, how that conversation stacks up in terms of ensuring that appraisal is done correctly so that you can get the highest valuation or the most accurate valuation in your home so that you're able to live through life. And so, you know, when Joshua and I actually sat down after that, you know, one exchange on LinkedIn, you know, it really, we both understood that we saw eye to eye and we actually wanted the same results, you know, for homeowners at the end of the day. And so, you know, that was, you know, one of those great meeting moments. But I would say, you know, I want to get Joshua's backstory, you know. I mean, I love to do this, you know. So Joshua, start us off, you know, why you've been doing this for 20 years. What inspired you to really go into this field? What inspired you to want to do this? And why have you stuck with it for like over 20 years?
So, you know, I was in retail banking before I was an appraiser. And so I was at the branches around town. And when I left, I was a manager of one of the brick and mortar bank branches. And I really at one point just said to myself, I wonder if I want to do this for, you know, another 30 or 40 years or however long. And, you know, I was arriving at the answer, no, I really don't want to. And so I reached out to a friend, which is how actually a lot of appraisers become appraisers, reaching out to friend, family. And I said, hey, can I go with you on a few inspections? Would you consider training me? And and so we started up that conversation, and I really, the analytical side really appealed to me, sort of that scientific data, market data side, really able to take a look at this data, use some tools, extract some information from it. So that's what I could base conclusions on. And I really liked that aspect. And I think, you know, I was really going to my friend as a homeowner almost, right? Having that sort of homeowner understanding or little understanding of, hey, what does an appraiser do, right? We don't necessarily have that perspective. If you say doctor, you get a certain idea in your head. What is this person, right? If you say, you know, teacher, you get a certain idea. If you say appraiser, a lot of people don't know what you even mean. What does an appraiser do? And that's actually something we've worked on at NAA and just over the years, you know, letting people know what is it that an appraiser does. And so I had an idea in my head of what it was. I go to my friend. We go on a few inspections, and I realized, well, the inspection isn't all of it. So then all the data analysis back at the office really appealed to me. And so it really just fleshed out my understanding. And that's how I became an appraiser, and took a look at efficiencies. I always tell people in my office, if we coach appraisal firms, we always say, look, if we're taking 30 seconds to do something that doesn't need to happen, or it can be done in 3 seconds, we're going to shorten that. We're going to do it. So I was always big on efficiency, and I really saw the potential for harnessing some of the technology to make it quicker, not sloppy, but quicker, right? So we can be more efficient. And that really appealed to me as well. And I started sharing with appraisers. Then I learned a lot about the compliance. So how can we be very efficient, and then also to show compliance with the methods and techniques that the regulators recognize, right? So we have transparency of our process, we have consistency of our process. And so that's sort of how I've branched out and then moved from field appraiser into the role I have now, where it's a lot more varied type of work. So every day is different. Some days better than others, depending on the problem we're solving, but it's always different and exciting. So
fantastic. And what intrigued me from just how you got into it, and I think that it is instructive for, how has your mindset shifted coming from, because you started off like me, you're just that normal everyday homeowner who wants to understand about your home, and you were thinking of a career change. So I guess, if I would define it as an epiphany moment, that was your epiphany. It was like, okay, yeah, here's what I like: data, I like analytics, I like numbers, but I've also had an experience from banking, and therefore as a homeowner this interests me. So when you shifted and moved from that, from like the homeowner side to now the appraiser side, what in your mindset, I guess, shifted, or what really started looking very different for you? Because I think that for us as homeowners, I think that answer is really important to understand how we now view our homes, because, or what insight you gained from just moving from that aspect to this, to your current aspect. How has it really helped you so that you can really understand what needs to be done, and how can it help us as regular homeowners really think in a way to be able to ensure that we get the most value out of our homes?
Yeah, that's a good question. So let me attack that from maybe a couple different perspectives. So I remember when I was starting, maybe I was 3, 4, or 5 months into appraising, so just, a baby at that point, right? We went over a friend's house, and they knew, oh, Josh has this new job, and they were asking me about it. And this friend, who not an appraiser, he's a teacher, he said, yeah, we had our house refinanced, last year or last month, whenever it was. And he said, and the appraiser asked me what value we needed, because we understand, him as a homeowner, we understand that, the value is different if it's a purchase versus if it's a refinance. And my head just about exploded, because that's just about the entirely opposite of what reality is, right? We as so this was a bad example of an appraiser. This was bad behavior for the appraiser, and especially in terms of communicating to a homeowner, just misinformation. We don't take a look at a value being different for refi versus a purchase. We look at the definition of market value that the regulators give us, and it's the same definition whether it's purchase or refinance. So we're solving for the same definition. We're solving for the same value, no matter if it's purchase or refi. And that has stuck with me all these years. And I just to throw in another perspective of this, at the appraisal summit just a few weeks ago, which the NAA puts on with appraiser e-learning, we had a bias session, and I moderated this session. I had a few words kind of setting the stage, so to speak, beforehand, but then we had, I think, an hour and a half, and it was just questions and answers. And we were like, you know what? We're going to have questions and answers from the audience. It's not going to be this preset spiel on bias and discrimination issues and this and that. We had a wide variety of roles and so on. And what we really took away, quite a few things, but one of the big things was communication with homeowners, right? We're not going to have an ad on TV telling us what an appraisal is. We're going to have to learn what an appraisal is from an appraiser. And so when that appraiser goes out to the house, I had always had a sort of a closing talk when I was getting ready to leave a house. And I would say, okay, well, this was actually my first step. This is actually the simplest piece. I measured, I took photographs, I made notes about your house. That's actually the first step. Now I'm going to go back and I'm at the mercy of the sales in the marketplace. I'm going to look at what similar properties sell for and compare it by room count and condition and, you know, on and on. And I gave a little spiel, and that's what we really, it seems so simple and maybe minor in the big picture, but it will have such a major effect if we can impact the type of communication we have with homeowners, right? If I didn't know what an orthodontist was, and at a certain point in time, people didn't know what orthodontists were, right? They'd be going to a dentist. Well, the dentists had to have those conversations with people, right? You didn't have orthodontist, ads in the newspaper or something. Maybe it did, but not, in a big way. You actually learned it by talking with people. And so there was that learning moment. So it's not an exact match for what we're talking about, but having those moments with homeowners, saying, when you schedule the appointment, setting the expectation, hey, if you have the lights on, it'll help me. I'll need to get into every room. I really want to see the features in every room and every closet. If you've made repairs or made changes, have that ready. If you have invoices or just the information, tell me, right? That is the type of communication we need. And it's possibly not always there, or in some cases, maybe the homeowner isn't physically there. They say, oh, it's a refinance. I'll leave the key under the mat. Okay. I mean, that happens all the time. Or it's a purchase and the real estate agent isn't there. Or, certainly the buyer's not there because the buyer doesn't live there yet, right? So we know that. So there are some obstacles to overcome. We actually, at the NAA, we have a two-sided sheet. We wanted to keep it really brief, and it's called What is Appraisal? And it's this two-sided sheet of paper. It's not in appraiser-ese. It's not using weird lingo. It's just saying, this is what the appraiser does. This is the obligations of confidentiality. These are the approaches to value. And so it really just says, we're accessible. Talk to your appraiser. It's possibly one of the biggest takeaways is there's a preconception sometimes that the appraiser can't talk with people. Sometimes that comes from whoever that other person is. Sometimes that comes from the appraiser. You say, oh my gosh, I can't talk to anyone. No, we certainly can't. We can't talk about confidential information, but we can talk, and we should. We should have those open lines. So I'm not sure. That's a long answer to a very short question, but hopefully I'm not getting you off track too much. But it's really, communication seems so simple and innocent, and it's not to push aside big problems. It's actually to support and build the foundation for the big problems being handled.
Yeah, Joshua, that's really helpful to mention communication. I don't think everyone knows, like, what are the questions you should be asking, or I don't even know what should I be doing to figure out if this is a good appraiser for me. I think, generally speaking, consumers, whoever the person shows up, they let them in the door and they just kind of follow their lead, because this isn't their day-to-day, right? This isn't the job. They're just the homeowner, right? They don't know, I don't know, plumber comes in, I tell him it's a leaky thing, and then I let him do his thing, and then he tells me what to do, right? So it's not my expertise.
He gives you a bill.
And then he gives me a bill, and then I give him a report. But I don't try to diagnose it. I don't know, any of that until you have a rapport with someone. But because this is like a very singular, it's very rare that you see the same person more than once. Can you just give some consumers a few tips or a few things that would help them identify? I'll be more specific. 3 things that you think that they should be looking for when they're finding an appraiser, and 3 things that they should be like thinking about for communication, like super simple to make it easier on everyone if you can, just so that they can get a sense of, okay, this person is going to help me do this thing and I don't feel beholden to them, which I think a lot of homeowners feel like this is, this person that's, you got a lot of fingers crossed, fingers toes. I hope this person likes me and they like my house.
Okay, great. So I might be shorter than 3 or more than 3. I don't know where I'm going to end up here, but so this is a great topic. All right. So I think at one point you said, is this appraiser good, kind of a good fit for me or something? I'm maybe mangling your words a little bit, but I think that's kind of the spirit of what you're saying. So we do want to know as a consumer that when we get a lending appraisal, we're there for a home equity loan, home equity line, a first mortgage, whatever it is, we're going through a bank, some sort of financial institution. There are regulations in place that say the lender is the client, the lending entity, the bank is the client. And that means I can't talk as an appraiser about specific conclusions I have come to, or I, the report and things like that. So any conclusions, I analyze things and I come to conclusions. I can't discuss those specifically. So sometimes that kind of limits the conversation, but we can talk about what type of process we go through. Well, let me tell you about the sales comparison, right? And so we can talk about all of that process, the general process we go through. We just can't say, okay, and these were this is the conclusion. Of course, at the house, we're not going to know what our conclusion is anyway, right? So we do want to understand, though, that the regulations tell us the bank, the lending institution, is the appraiser's client. So that confidentiality, think of it like an attorney-client privilege. It's between the appraiser and the client, the appraiser and the bank. So that does impact some of the specific drilled down information we can talk about. The other aspect of that is sort of who selects the appraiser. And again, the regulations come in and they say it needs to be the lending institution and it cannot be anyone in loan production. So it can't be the real estate agent to select the appraiser. It can't be the homeowner to select the appraiser. It can't be loan production people at the lender. It needs to be sort of a firewall, a boxed off division, so to speak, at the lender. And so then what that means in terms of homeowner input on that process is know who you're working with in terms of a lending institution. So let's say you talk to your loan officer and you say, okay, what types of qualifications go into appraisers? Now, they may not know, maybe they can find out, but it does take some of that or all of that sort of choosing process out of the hands of homeowners, agents, and the loan officers themselves. So what I would look at instead, again, know who you're working with in terms of a lender. But when that appraiser calls, there is nothing wrong with you asking, how long have you worked in this market? Now, that makes it a little hard for newcomers. They might say, I moved here. I have 20 years experience. I've just moved here though, right? Okay, all right. But we also want to ask, not just how long have you been appraising, but, are you the appraiser? Asking a little bit about their background. Let's say you're in a manufactured house. Have you appraised to manufactured houses? Now, can you go back to the lender and say, oh, I want that person removed? That's a very delicate process, and it has a lot of regulations for the lender to be able to say, we don't want that appraiser there. Well, why? Because the homeowner said they didn't want them. Well, now we're back to the rule that the homeowner can't influence who's being selected. So it is this sort of push and pull, but we want to talk to them about any specific features in our house. Let's say they have solar panels. Does the person have experience appraising solar panels? Has that person taken any education on solar panels? Now, there may be some appraisers out there who say, well, I don't have to answer those questions. Well, I mean, yeah, okay, we don't have to answer the question. We're not under some sort of law that says we need to answer the questions. But as a professional, I have no problem answering those questions. And many, many appraisers that I know would have absolutely no problem answering those types of questions. So, talking about who are you, what type of experience, what type of expertise, what type of education, the appraisers, who understand that this type of conversation is beneficial are already, leaps ahead of maybe people who just haven't had a lot of that experience in terms of having the conversations, because we can have conversations. And so I would say also, when that appraiser is at the house, go through with them, point out the features, right? You don't necessarily know everything that brings value in the marketplace or detracts from value perhaps, or has no effect on value. But if you're pointing out all those features, they can make the notes right then. They can take the photographs right then. And then however it impact value can be taken care of at their desk later when they're, of course, doing all their research and analyzing characteristics. So, so you asked about, some 3 things about, kind of gauging the appraiser almost. It's a little bit limited there, right? But as far as what can be asked, asking about the features, but telling about the features. If you have remodeled, if you've updated, what were the dates? Do you have details? And that's actually, I think, part of the conversation that Daniel and I have had in the past is, are they rummaging through piles of papers and through a file cabinet and through that kitchen drawer and trying to find, when was it that we did what and what did we have done and things like that? If they don't have it in one place, it may be hard for them to even produce anything or remember anything to even tell the appraiser. So don't be afraid to share information with the appraiser. That would probably be the biggest and best advice. If it's absolutely no impact on the market, the appraiser will, they're going to mark it down and, that extra outlet in the bedroom doesn't add, whatever, you can't gauge it in the marketplace. That's the appraisal will handle that. The appraiser will handle that. But don't be afraid to talk to the appraiser. We should not be afraid to do. I've done it on my own house. There's nothing wrong with following them around, giving them details. You'll have to step out of the way for photos and things, but other than that, there's really no problem to follow them around. So
thank you so much. This is super helpful. I'm going to try to succinctly say what I took some notes on. And Daniel, I'm sure is ready for the next question. But I just heard like homeowners, like, being comfortable to ask, like, what's the process? Being able to ask them how long have they been in the market? A little bit, they don't mind sharing their background. And as you mentioned, this is communication, right? So you're wanting to communicate to them things about your home, pointing out features, sharing insights in the remodel, dates, details if you have it, but then also hopefully they'll be also sharing with you their expertise, whether or not they know solar panels, new builds, etc. So I think that's what I heard you say, which I think is hopefully helpful to the listeners, because that is what you really need to know and not get intimidated by someone who feels like a big authority figure coming in there and you just don't know what to do. But the key word of communication. Thank you.
And I'll add one thing quickly, because I know I got a little worry there. Even sharing with the appraiser the sales that the homeowner is aware of. 4 doors down, that house sold. Sometimes they say, recently, and you look it up and it's like, that was 2.5 years ago. That was a long time ago. But it may be 2 months ago, and then it's really useful. So if the worst they can do is go back to their office, look it up and say, that house is nothing like the house I just looked at. It's not really best, but then they have it in their notes. They have a reason. If they're ever questioned by the lender coming back, they can say, I didn't use it because of XYZ right there. So anyway, I'll let you ask another question here.
So one of the things that you mentioned just now is really who the borrower or what is the purpose of the evaluation or the appraisal, and how that goes. And I think that it leads to the whole question. What jumped to my mind immediately was this whole issue of reconsideration of value, and how to go about that process. Because, my favorite topic lately around appraisals is, hey, appraisal bias, because it's topical. The last 2 years we've dealt with it a lot. But I would say that, and you and I just have, Joshua have, talked about some of this, the vast differences in some reconsideration of values and how that has gone on, and what they impact, especially for minority homeowners, and how it a bad valuation basically impacts everything, could impact everything if the homeowner doesn't know what to do or how to go about, doing that. But again, to zero in on that, and I guess this could be multi-part, depending on how you want to take it. But ultimately, um, because of the regulations and the war that exists there, how do homeowners really go about? Because we can't select the appraiser number one, but if I feel like my valuation has been too low, how do I go about doing that and challenging it and finding somebody else who is basically, who I may feel may give me a more fair valuation on my home? And so how does that process, really take form and take shape, or how should homeowners, again, because again you came from that side, so and you said in the end you just did, you've done it previously, so how do homeowners really go about that? Were you happy with even your valuation or what that said? And then how did you, if you had to challenge, what does that process look like?
Yeah, that's a really good question. That's actually a high priority at the agencies right now. The regulators are looking at, they have provided guidance to lending institutions that they regulate to say you need to have, basically the message is you need to have a reconsideration of value process in place, and you need to at least tell your borrowers about it so they know, right? So what has emerged is reconsiderations of value have been around years and years. I mean, there's nothing weird about the concept. The concept is I'm the homeowner and I say, I don't think this valuation is right. Maybe they find some mistakes in the report. Maybe they say, why didn't they use that house 4 doors down? What went on? Here's sales I'm aware of. Whatever that process, it's existed for many years. And there has not been a consistent implementation of that at every AMC, appraisal management company, and at every lender. And so that's what the regulations are looking to solve, saying, we sort of know what a reconsideration of value process is, but we need to have it, we need to see it at every institution. And this goes back a bit to that confidentiality, right? That report's turned in, the lender provides a copy of it to the homeowner looks and says, oh my gosh, and they have whatever issue or question on it. They can't pick up the phone and talk specifics to the appraiser, right? Because the appraiser can share, general information on how the process goes, but they can't say, and I chose these 3 or 4 sales because I think they're this way, and I adjusted them downward, and that's how I arrived at this number. And that's conclusions. Those are the conclusions that the appraiser is arriving at. It's confidential, can only be between the appraiser and the lender client. So what the homeowner needs to be aware of is they need to go to their lender and say, I demand to have, I don't know if you'd word it that way, but I want to have a reconsideration of value because of, there needs to be some legitimate reason, right? I see these other sales, I think they're more similar than what was used in the report. That would be a really good example of a reconsideration. And then the lender then forwards it on to the appraiser, and they might say, hey, can you, in the next day or 2 or 3, can you respond to it, right? The worst thing an appraiser can do at that point is say, I used the best sales, it stands, right? Even though as appraisers, gosh, it's a little more work, we're going to have to put more writing in my report. I have to modify my report for the lender. I'm going to have to explain why I didn't use this sale at 4 doors down. I'm going to have to maybe they're asking for more rationale for the adjustments we made for if a comparable sale had something inferior or superior, we make adjustments to make it sort of equivalent to the subject, right? So, we have questions on that. Oh, I've got to add some language there, some explanation. No one likes doing more work, but it goes back to public trust. It goes back to agreements that we may have already agreed to with that lender or AMC that says we will fulfill reconsideration of value requests. So what we want to really see in the report, though, is that transparent reporting of what our process was. And so appraisers are trained from day one to explain in their report what their process included, possibly what their process didn't include. Sometimes we don't do certain things because it's not necessary for, you know, particular property types or whatnot. And then we might explain, you know, how did I search for sales? Why did I select those particular sales? How did I make adjustments? What types of methods did I rely on? I'm not going to write a math book on it. No one wants to read that anyway, but I'll explain very generally, perhaps some specifics on how those numbers come about. And that actually can impact or maybe even reduce the number of reconsideration of value, because the lender looks at it and says, well, yeah, we can ask them, but look, the appraiser already explained it here, right? So I'm not sure we really need to ask them that question. They already explained why they didn't use that sale 4 doors down or what have you. So that is it's just a really hot button item. It was actually an interesting topic to come out of the bias and discrimination, I'll say, project or research that the PAVE task force underwent. Coming back with reconsiderations of value was, I mean, it's not necessarily related to one people group. It just exposed a real, lack of transparency on what homeowners are allowed to do. I mean, homeowners have always been allowed to go back to their loan officer, but they're not being advised of that. And the spiel that I would often give at the end, again, at the end of being at the house is, you know, this is the first step. I go back to my desk, you know, that's the research, that's the real guts of the appraisal. And if you get a copy from your lender and have questions on it, just be aware, I can't necessarily talk specifics with you, but your loan officer can take a look at it with you. And if you both still have that question, they'll forward it to me and I'll get back a revised report, you know. So setting that expectation, telling the homeowner, this is how the process goes. It's the regulators. I can't change it, but this is how we do it. Then they know what their right is, if you will, right? They know what they're able to do. So, and that I think has been lacking. People don't know they can, submit a reconsideration of value. They can't. They think, oh, it's there. The report's done. I won't even bother talking to my loan officer about it. And that's the wrong thing to think. So,
thank you for that answer. I would say that ultimately that is one of the things, and I think that it goes back to the whole question of communication. I think that, which is what keeping me and what we're doing even on this podcast. It's about the education piece, because I think communication, education, all of those elements of the discussions really aligns. And I think that what has really spurred this issue, especially around appraisals, is just because this is the most important asset that people will ever purchase in their life. This is what is the foundation of the American dream for a lot of people. We have, as a society, we've told people, hey, go get the house, get the education, etc. But the house and the car and all the other elements of what the American dream is really rooted on this foundation of home ownership. And also, when you start looking at it, generational wealth is really predicated in many instances based on the ability to own a home or the ability to understand how to use your home as an asset. And therefore, the injustice, I would say, a bit of it, that we've done to some homeowners who don't understand, okay, well, I can file a reconsideration of value, or these are the steps that I can possibly take, hinders them from being able to understand how to use this asset really in a meaningful way, to be able to extract value out of it when they need to. And so I think that it's critical that you focus on the education bit. So I want you to get into a bit of what the National Association of Appraisals does, and how you really are focused on this issue of communication and what you've seen come out of that, because I think that that can really be, and I know you're not doing as much consumer uh, interface in it, but that I think is one of those starting points, because even if we go back to the PAVE report and what their findings were, etc., and how they plan to increase the amount of appraisers, I think it's critical that, you know, all the other elements of this conversation really weigh in on how we can really help homeowners, because I think that for me, where we sit, you know, the homeowners feel like the entity in this whole conversation who doesn't necessarily always have a voice. And so I think that it's about how do we give them a voice and give them options to really understand how they need to basically manage this asset.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, the National Association of Appraisers, we have individual appraiser members, as well as we call ourselves an association of associations. So really, where we get a lot of momentum and a lot of activity is by having what we call the Board of Governors, the state appraiser associations or state appraiser coalitions, which sort of, you know, historically sort of operate on their own. And what the NAA has been able to do is sort of bring them under an umbrella, recognizing that if we want change, if we need improvement, if we see problems that we want to solve, a lot of the time those are at the state level, especially for the appraisal space. Now, it doesn't mean that it's only at the state level, but you can get a lot of momentum and a lot of change. You can take a look at what works well in one state and say, hey, could that be moved over here to this state? And could we have better regulation to where we can actually fix some problems that we see. NAA is committed to helping its members in terms of education by having boots on the ground appraisers, as well as other industry experts present at general sessions. But we also have typically pre-conference education. It includes all the, anything that's hot and topical at the moment. And one of the things that we've looked at for actually a number of years, I want to say, I've been, I think, with the National Association 8 or 9 years, is looking at technology in some fashion. Of course, technology changes every day, so it has changed over the years in terms of what we look at, but really taking a look at, we have this modernization buzzword right now, but a lot of the time when people say modernization in the appraisal space, they're talking about the property data collection process, which could be an appraiser, could be a trainee, it could be someone else. And they're talking about the property data collection. Now, remember what my spiel used to be to homeowners. This is just the first step, and the real process occurs at my desk. And that's the analysis of data, really crunching and seeing what the market tells me about properties like the subject. And so we seem to always be talking about modernization, and it's always about the property inspection, which is arguably, I want to say it's one of the simpler, perhaps one of the, it's not, it can be complex, but not every time, right? It's a lot of, what do I see? Let me write it down. Let me ask questions and things. So I'm not trying to discount that process, but it's not as complex as data analysis at the desk, right? So what I like to really have them focus on the technology education that our members see is taking a look at the analytics part, right? Taking a look at, how do I crunch this data? How do I search the data? What is the data telling me about the market trends? What is my data telling me about what types of properties are conforming and regularly appear in certain markets? What is my technology telling me in terms of similarity of properties, right? I think sometimes the best we can get is not merely human, not merely machine, but when we say the human and the machine, right? A lot of the automated value systems are not what we need for mortgage lending or for other purposes even. But when you put two together, when you put the human operating the machine, you can crunch. I know crunch is not the right term, but I like to put that there. We can analyze a lot more data. We can be more efficient. We can be more precise in our value conclusions, right? Because instead of taking a look at 3 or 4 sales and analyzing those in a very specific way, maybe we're looking at 50 or 60 or 200 sales and analyzing them in a very specific way. We have a more perhaps a more precise conclusion. We can learn more about it. So I think in terms of what's the NAA doing, yes, it tends to be internal, right? What are we doing for our members? And actually, in some ways, for the profession as a whole, even non-members. But that technology helps with consistency. It helps with transparency because we can explain what happened. We can have a report that shows what we did much better, sometimes through visualization of data, sometimes in some very quick and simple narrative text areas. And of course, it can make the whole process a little bit more efficient. And then the other way that just pops in my head anyway during this discussion is that what is appraisal, right? And that is consumer facing, that is public facing. It's right on the website, and we're encouraging our members, we're encouraging our state association members to distribute it. Even state associations that are not members, we're saying this is available. This can be on every single countertop at every single house that we appraise. It can be emailed to every single agent that we are doing the, when we're doing a purchase appraisal. People can understand that. So sometimes it's small steps. But that's, I mean, if I had to sort of, really boil down what we do, it's really trying to take a look at what is the hot topic and what are solutions for some hot issues out there.
Fantastic. Amira, you want to take it?
Oh, go ahead.
No, I think it's really helpful to understand a bit of, what you're doing today and kind of also how you're getting there. I know we're closer to time, but the question that I guess I have for you really, Joshua, is, what do you see as the future for your industry and what it brings to homeowners? When I heard you talk about like the hot topics and the things that are important, it made me think I'm talking to someone who's probably looking at the future and helping create it for a lot of folks. So curious, what is the thing that you think is going to show up for us?
Yeah, I tend to be a silver lining person, which not everybody agrees with, because I'll look at a problem and I'll somehow feel positive about this problem, and people don't want that necessarily, or they just naturally don't feel that way, and that's okay. But what we're going through right now in the appraisal profession, examining, our methods and techniques, asking questions like why, when we look at the records of this appraiser, and this is actually happening in cases, why do we see inconsistency from one appraisal to another for the same appraiser, right? And it's not always going to be the exact identical process, but where is the consistency of the methods and techniques? And many appraisers do a great job in being consistent in their process. But again, silver lining is, what can we learn from some of those cases? We haven't seen any of them adjudicated at this point, but what can we learn when they do have some results on those cases in terms of how can I improve myself? How can this appraisal firm improve itself? How can associations improve the profession by saying this is how we can be more consistent and more transparent in what we're doing? I think we see a lot of technology. We're going to see more technology. We see a lot of various scopes of appraisal. And what I mean by that is there are some cases where we're doing more desktops. Now, desktop appraisals have occurred for decades, but Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac were not really in that space. Now they are, so it's a lot more, we're talking about it a lot more, but taking a look at data sources. And that's what excites me about, when we say homeowners can have a lot of data. Okay, can we have a lot of data from the homeowner? And then how can we verify or confirm some of that data? So, okay, yeah, we're getting it from an interested party, but if we don't actually go out to the property, I think we're gonna see some technological solutions on how still can we use that data by confirming it in different ways. So we're going to see a lot more variety, but with that is going to be more communication, whether that's from the lenders, whether that's from the appraisers to the homeowners, right? Saying it's a desktop. Do you know what a desktop appraisal is? This is the process. This is how it's different, right? So we're going to see broader scopes, broader spectrums of appraisal types. There's even talk, I mentioned earlier, appraisers are at the mercy of the regulators. The regulators say, appraisers, for mortgage, you need to solve for what is called market value. That means, how do buyers and sellers behave? I can't choose to pick the property up and put it over there. It's where it is. That's how it would transact on the market. But there's actually examination right now of what other value definitions, what other types of value could we solve for? So I think we call it, in the appraisal world, we call it, what's the problem I'm solving? Identify the problem. I think we're going to see, I know that there are certain projects out there right now trying to come up with different definitions of value for certain circumstances. We already have liquidation value. We have anticipated sale price for relocation. Will we have a larger locational value, or whatever it might be called? So I think there's a lot on the horizon for appraisal. And with changes, it's hard for the appraiser, because change is always hard for anybody at impact. But the change is going to have to be communicated. So I think what we need to do is we need to set up the lines of communication. We need to set up the pipes of communication. How do we get that out there so everyone else is aware of what's going on? Because the appraisal profession right now is a mystery. It shouldn't be a mystery to anybody. Everybody should understand what an appraiser does.
Thank you for that. That's super helpful to kind of see what you're seeing, because you're closer to it than myself, for sure. Daniel, you have a final question that you might have while we have Joshua? It's been a delight.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, I have tons of questions. Just the last two answers, I have questions for Joshua. But we'll have to circle back with Joshua. But I would say, my favorite final question, if you had a magic wand and you could change anything, Joshua, what would it be as we go forward into the future? And it kind of piggybacks a bit on Amira's question of what you see. But I mean, this is Joshua with no limitations. What would be different, or what would you change?
Oh man, well, first I would wave my magic wand to get more wishes. So I would do that. But in seriousness, if I had a magic wand, what I would do, I think, is we have seen regulations that have sort of pushed appraisers into this sort of isolation position, to where we're in our own homes, we're in our own offices. We don't talk to each other, perhaps. We don't talk to the public. So I think the magic wand would be to make appraisal more accessible and less isolated in how we're clearly seeing it exists right now. So that might be my magic wand. I don't know if that's nothing really new. I've already kind of talked about that, but hopefully that answers your magic wand question.
No, and that's a fantastic way for us to end. I think ultimately that it comes down to transparency. It comes down to communication. It comes down to empowering. I would say both sides of the tools. And like I said, I have tons of questions, but I loved it when you were talking about what I would call is the hybrid valuation model, which uses the technology but also the human appraiser. I believe that is the way of the future, personally. And so we can get into that on our next episode, or next time we get you on, Joshua. But thank you very much for being here. Thank you for sharing your insights and your knowledge, and really inspiring homeowners, because I think that really you coming from this side of the fence, really, and going to be an appraiser, really adds a lot of credibility to a lot of these conversations, because I would also say it feels lonely and can feel isolating as a homeowner sometimes. So thank you very much, and thanks guys for tuning into another episode of Keep Wise with Keeping Me, and we'll see you. Bye.
Thank you all.
Thanks so much. Appreciate it.